Hey everybody! It is almost 5 o'clock. Almost 5 o'clock. We're gonna wait like 1 minute or so before we get started. Um, while we're waiting on everybody, let me say that this has been a totally awesome experience. Building the fan base on Twitter, on Instagram, you guys have been absolutely amazing. Um, as we're going to do today with the format, we're going to have a reading of the first chapter by me. This is the first time I'm ever doing this, so cross your fingers on this one. This is going to be real raw, real unedited. You would think I would know my own words, but life happens. So we're going to do a reading of the book, and then after we get done with the reading of the book, we will answer any questions that you guys have about me. I have about 5 pieces of information that people wanted to know about me. And then after we do the 5 pieces of information, then I will announce the winners and just kind of wait and see who else shows up. So it is 5 o'clock. Thank you girls again for joining me today. Again, we're going to be reading out of the book Stranger in a Familiar Place. If you guys want a copy of this book, you guys can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, in paperback and in ebook form. And without further delay, we're going to get started. Again, be gentle, guys, because this is the first time I've ever done this like live. And again, you would think I would know my own words, but I don't. All right, here we go. Chapter 1. Elias had always gone through life as he was told he should. School, sports, friends, they were all a part of his life as a whole. Yet there was something that was missing from all of it. Fundamental, and yet so simple that he had hardly stopped to think about it. He had a life, friends and family, and yet he had never wanted to live his life. The realization made his blood grow cold, and his limbs felt heavy as if they were being pinned down by some unknown force. He looked at his killer, and for the first time, he wanted to live. Pain, wrenching pain, tore open Elias's eyes, and a scream escaped his lips as he felt fire leap throughout his being. His head ached as if it were splitting apart agonizingly slow, and he felt the blood in his head pound mercilessly against his forehead. Another cry escaped his lips, and he screwed his eyes shut and bit into his lips, drawing blood. Why? Why does it hurt? He thought as he lay there wondering what had happened to him. Then suddenly, the pain was no more. His body slowly relaxed, and he let himself sink into pure relief. Then a new sensation hit him. It was cold, deathly cold. He flung his eyes open, and suddenly the world came crashing into him. The wind whipped angrily at his body and bombarded him with snow and ice. It took Elias a moment to realize that he was actually halfway buried in the snow, which explained not only the cold, but also why his limbs ached and were numb. He pulled himself slowly upright, mentally checking himself for injuries. He touched his lips, where he had bitten them, and found that the blood had already congealed due to the cold. He began to shiver violently as his mind was beginning to register the cold. He looked around bewildered. Wasn't I walking home? The snow-covered woods was anything but home, and on top of that there was nothing that even resembled civilization. Where am I? And how do I get home? As if in rebuttal to his thoughts, the wind howled angrily and batted at him with snow and ice that stung his cheeks till they were bright red and sore. He decided that sitting in the snow was not a good thing and proceeded to stand. His legs ached and refused to work at first, but he soon made himself to stand. He looked around. The woods were dark, and he could barely see more than 5 feet in front of him because of the snow. So he just chose a direction and began walking, hoping that direction he chose would lead him to a warmer place. As he walked, he began to sense something out there beyond his vision. Something was coming toward him as if he were food. The sudden awareness made him halt in his tracks and cast cautious gazes out to the unknown. Though he couldn't see it, he could feel it getting closer, and with it a dark malice and hate. Black and vengeful, the unknown presence seemed as if it would swallow everything in its path into a nightmarish void. More than anything, the thing that scared Elias the most was when he realized that he was the target of it all. He didn't think, and he didn't wait. He just ran. His breath pumped out of his mouth like exhaust from a barreling train, and each breath stung his lungs as he inhaled the frigid air. The thing was getting closer, and the heat from it pressed against his body, making it even more painful to continue running. He looked behind him, but he couldn't see anything in the snow, and yet he knew it was just seconds behind him. His legs gave way and he fell. He quickly twisted himself to face the oncoming attacker. His heart raced, and despite the cold, he was wet with sweat. Panic struck as he began to see the outline of something huge, and from it was coming the overwhelming dominance of a predator. Elias's eyes grew wider as the thing grew impossibly bigger in form, along with its hate and need for blood. His blood. Elias did not know why he did it. He wasn't even sure he thought someone would hear him. Nevertheless, he threw back his head and screamed with all he had, "Somebody save me!" Instantly, the huge form vanished, taking with it its murderous intent. Did I scare it? Elias thought to himself, unable to believe that he had actually frightened something so monstrous. He stared at the place where it had disappeared, wondering if moving would cause the thing to come back for him. "Hello there," a voice called from beyond the wall of snow and ice. Elias relaxed fractionally. Had someone heard him? "I'm over here," he called out, hoping he was louder than the wind. He made the movement to stand, but froze mid-movement as he began to see an outline of something big walking toward him. Fear gripped him again, and he wondered if the thing had come for him anyway. Though something was strange. There was no hate or malice emanating from the thing moving toward him. "Hello, Elias." Elias knew what was left of the color in his face had drained away. Standing before him, whiter than the snow, was a very huge and massive polar bear. "You were calling for help?" I, he stuttered, although whether it was from fear or the cold, he didn't know. The white bear grunted. "Obviously that's a yes. I would not have come to you if you hadn't asked. Although I might have chased it away anyhow," he growled softly. "I don't like that thing in my woods." "Who are you?" Elias couldn't help himself. The fact that someone had heard him and the fact that his rescuer was a polar bear piqued his curiosity. "Me? I'm known by many names, boy, but you may call me Malak." The great bear pawed the earth and stepped closer to Elias, who unconsciously proceeded to take a step backwards. "Oh, come now. If I were going to eat you, I would have done so by now." Malak shook his hulking frame, sending a shower of snow flying from his back. "Now get on my back. We must get you warmed up before you catch your death of cold." He saw Elias's uncertainty and growled, "Get on my back, or I will carry you in my mouth." The bear opened his mouth wide, revealing the large, sharp canines that hung beautifully against the black of his mouth. With no more need for prompting, Elias walked toward the bear, who lay flat on his stomach to allow better access. Even then, it took Malak using his head to gently push the bear, to push the nearly frozen boy onto his back. I told you guys it was going to be raw. "Hold on tight," Malak said as he rose to his feet, and with a powerful leap he began running. Elias was amazed that the bear could move so fast, and even more amazing was the fact the bear had known his name. He was pretty sure he had never met any talking bears, much less polar bears before. Then all at once it hit him. The bear's fur was warm, and he pressed his body up against the bear. The warmth from Malak flooded into him, and he suddenly found himself slowly closing his eyes. "Fear not, Elias. You will be safe." Malak's voice was warm and calm and confident, and Elias found it soothed him. He did not need a second prompting. He shut his eyes and slept. It was some time before he could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of Malak's chest. The big bear had found a warm cave and had curled around him to keep him warm. He roamed the cave with his eyes and noticed a small pool of water near the corner of the cave that was fed by a small trickle of water that dripped from a crack in the wall. Seeing the water made him realize just how dry his throat had become. He swallowed to rid the feeling, but only ended up coughing violently. "You sure are noisy when you wake up," Malak said as he yawned slowly. Of course, considering the alternative, that's a good thing. He ignored the bear's remarks and got up slowly and crawled on his hands and knees until he reached the pool. He cupped his hands and proceeded to dip his hands in the water, but stopped when he realized he couldn't feel anything. It wasn't a numbness, even that has a particular feel to it, but there was no feeling of wet. He looked at his hands and saw the water trickling down the middle of his palms, but he could feel nothing. If he hadn't been looking at it, he wouldn't have known he had even touched the water. As he looked at the water, he also noticed the loss of sensation was not only in his hands, but throughout his entire body. Small things, like the flicker of his eyelids, the gentle beating of his heart, or even his own skin brushing up against his clothes. He couldn't feel anything. His first thought was to panic, and yet there was no such emotion. In fact, he was void of all emotion, just an irritating dullness that seemed to be centered where he knew his heart should be, but could not feel. He turned slowly to Malak, who seemed to be watching him as if he was waiting for something bad to happen. "Are you all right, Elias?" Malak inquired. The bear's black eyes was trained on him. Elias looked down at his hands again. "I don't know." Silence ensued between them for a long moment. All the while, Malak waited patiently for the boy to collect himself. "I want to go home," Elias said finally. The great bear stretched and settled himself more comfortably before answering. "I would take you home, but I can't. The way has been lost." "What do you mean, lost? My home should be far from here, and the snow seems to have calmed a bit." "Do you even know where you are, boy? If it were that simple, do you think you would need my help?" Malak sighed and scratched himself with a hind leg before continuing. "You are in the land of Salih, a place where there are many roads in, but only one way out. This land has been slowly losing vitality, and the 5 great pillars that hold this world and yours together have collapsed. Since the land has weakened, a great evil has been able to roam this land. It, and its minions that follow, have created disaster to those here, and it is also the reason why you were brought here in the first place." "So you mean I can't go home?" "I don't believe that ever came out of my mouth," Malak said. Despite not having the demotion to go with it, Elias frowned as if annoyed, but that only seemed to raise a growling chuckle from the big polar bear. "You can go home, but Salih will need to be restored before that can happen." "What should I do?" "What a stupid question, boy," the bear growled. "The answer you seek is very obvious, but also the choice does not lie with me. This must be your choice and your choice alone. It will not be easy, but I will help you where I can." He paused and waited until Elias had made up his mind. Once Elias had agreed, he asked Malak to explain further about the pillars he mentioned before. "The 5 pillars are what give this land vitality. It needs to thrive, and each pillar represents an aspect of Salih. The first pillar represents the physical nature, the second is the mental, the third is emotional, the fourth represents the will, and the fifth represents the heart or the soul of Salih. These must be restored in order for our world and yours to connect. But it will not be as simple as turning on a light or blinking. Each pillar has a requirement that must be fulfilled, and even though I call them pillars, they are not in that form exactly. So, along with all this, we must find them in whatever form they have taken before we can fulfill the needed requirement." Malak saw Elias's shoulders slump. "I know this is a lot to deal with, but as I promised, I will help you." "What about that thing that tried to eat me before? Is it another bear like you?" Elias asked. The bear snorted. "Don't compare me to that thing. I'm much better looking than it is." Elias rolled his eyes. Someone's got a high opinion of himself. "So? It's good to have high self-esteem, and besides, I work hard keeping my fur white. That is not an easy task, mind you." "Whatever. So where do we start? I don't have a clue where to go or where to look." "Luckily for you, I happen to know where the first pillar is, and by the looks of things, we better hurry and restore it." Elias looked at the bear hard. "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" "Don't play dumb." Malak rose in one easy motion and padded slowly up to Elias. He placed one of his huge paws on top of Elias's legs and pressed down. Even though he knew he was putting enough pressure to cause pain, Elias's face remained the same. "I know you can't feel anything. If I were anyone else, I could tear you limb from limb and you would not feel a thing. Right now, you have neither emotions nor any physical feeling in your body." He lifted his paw away and stood staring into the boy's eyes. "How did you know? And why is this happening?" Elias said, rubbing his leg. It didn't hurt, but the fact that it should made him react instinctively. "Your face. Even without emotions, it's still very readable. And just as your world and ours are connected, so are you and the land of Salih. We must hurry and restore Salih before the damage to you becomes irreversible. Come." Malak nudged him to stand, but Elias had no strength in his legs, and Malak had to sling the boy onto his back like a rag doll. Ignoring Elias's rebuttal, he made his way out into the snowy woods. Elias expected to feel the cold grab him again, but he felt nothing, and he wondered if that was a good thing or a bad thing. He decided that Malak would not let him freeze to death, so he decided just to let the bear do what he will. He settled into the bear's fur and watched lazily as the snow began to gradually thin out until he began to see green starting to peep out from the bald patches of snow. Eventually the green overtook the snow, and soon the bear was walking through ankle-high grass. "So where are you going?" Elias asked after a long silence. "I don't know," he said rather cheerily. "You don't know?" Elias sat up and gave the bear a hard look. "I did not stutter," the bear replied. "I thought you knew where the first pillar was," Elias said, trying to sound reprimanding. "I do. I just don't know where it is." If Elias could have been irritated, he was sure by now he would be. The bear never seemed to be serious. "Just hold on. I'm sure we'll find it soon. I'm almost positive." Almost. Elias rolled his eyes just for the heck of it. Even if he didn't feel that way, he was going to convey somehow that Malak was full of it sometimes. He could see the bear's sides rumble as he chuckled softly to himself, probably at some private joke he had made up. Again, silence overtook the pair, and it was hours before anything was said again. Malak had just finished telling a story about a fox and a gopher when he stopped and lifted his great head and sniffed the air with a big black wet nose. "What is it?" Elias asked. Malak turned to him. A big bearish grin was planted on his maw. "I found her!" "Her?" Elias asked. He scanned around the area looking for someone, but only saw trees and grass. The bear did not answer, but instead inhaled deeply and then let out a huge roar that reverberated inside Elias' chest and body. He hastily covered his ears to avoid his ears splitting. "Can I get a warning next time?" Elias said as he lowered his hands once the roar had ceased. "Sorry, I got a little excited. It's been so long since I've seen her." Before he could ask, he heard a series of short chirping yips and then a flash of gray popping up periodically among the grass. The gray blur emerged in front of them, curled and poised and just as proud-looking as any cloud leopard would be. The medium-sized cat eyed the pair for a minute, then walked up to Malak. A resounding purr erupted from her being as she rubbed up against one of his great legs. "Malak, it's been a long time," the leopard purred with half-closed eyelids. "I see you've been hunting well, Sheba. Your coat looks as glossy as ever," he replied, bringing his head down so he could look the leopard in the eyes. "Oh, stop it, Malak. You know flattery gets you everywhere with me." The purr in the leopard's throat pulsed, and Elias realized that the leopard was chuckling. As if she knew she was being surveyed, the great cat looked up at Elias with startling green eyes. "And who is this riding atop you like some undignified fool?" the cat said curtly. Malak chuckled. "Don't be mean, Sheba. I've brought you Elias, the one that is connected with our world of Salih." "Nice to meet you," Elias said sarcastically as he could. Sheba's tail flicked and curled around her feet. "I like him already. So, does this mean you've come for me for the pillar of the physical?" "How did you know about that?" Elias asked. "Because, boy, I am the keeper of the first pillar, and just so you know, I just don't give the pillar of the physical to any fool." The boy sighed. Was every talking animal here full of it? He made sure his tone was even before answering. "So, what are your requirements?" The big cat yawned, showing off her two massive canines, then curled politely into a comfortable ball before answering. "I require 3 tasks of you before I grant you the pillar. The first task is to go to the town of Lokite and find Yiddick, the gambler. He has a very nice bow and a quiver full of arrows that I want you to win from him. Once you have the bow and the quiver, come back, and I will give you your second task." "Aren't you forgetting something, Sheba?" Malak said, eyeing the cloud leopard with a disapproving look. The cloud leopard opened one eye and looked at Malak. "You take all the fun out of what I do," the cat sighed. "Very well." In one fluid motion she stood, and as if by some unknown signal, Elias was dropped unceremoniously in front of her. Without waiting for Elias to gather himself, the cloud leopard grabbed his left arm at the wrist and bit down. At first he could feel nothing, but then he began to feel pain welling up in his wrist where the leopard was biting down. A scream erupted from his lips as he tried to pull his wrist out of her grasp, but Sheba held his wrist firmly. "Bear with it a little longer," Sheba managed to mumble around a mouthful of flesh. He did just that and gritted his teeth and dug his free hand into the ground, pulling out clumps of grass and dirt. Finally Sheba released him, and his left arm fell limply to his side, blood running in rivulets down his palms. "Did you have to bite him so hard?" the bear said as he began to lick the wound. Elias was pale, and he trembled every time Malak's tongue passed over the wound. "It was you who insisted upon this, and yes, I did have to bite him that hard. Making use of the pillar has its cost, and the price for using it must be paid in blood." Sheba licked her bloody jaws and waited patiently until he had finished licking the wound. "How do you feel?" she asked once Malak had finished. Elias flexed his wrist timidly, but felt no pain, but stopped suddenly when he could feel. It was as if his body had come alive, and he rotated his wrist again, this time being able to feel the muscles bunch and relax in response to movement. He felt the gentle pulsing of his own heart and the rush of his blood as it traveled throughout his body. He even marveled at how the grass scratched gently against the skin and felt cool to the touch. He looked back at Sheba and saw that she was purring again with her eyes half closed. He looked down at his wrist where she had bitten him and could see angry red marks where her teeth had sunken into his wrist. As he gazed, he began to see something squirm underneath his skin. It was long and dark, and it began racing around, getting longer and darker. A second one split from the first, and from it the third appeared, each one circling and writhing around each other. Then they grew still, and Elias could see that they formed into distinct shapes, the shape of clouds. "That is my mark. It will temporarily allow you the ability of the first pillar. In order for you to keep it, you must complete my task within a certain time limit, or else the mark will vanish, and you will have no feeling in your body again." The cloud leopard stood and turned and started heading off into the grass, her tail snaking back and forth behind her. "Wait! How long do I have before it disappears?" Elias called after her. "Just hurry up and get going!" A growling voice answered her from the grass, and then there was the soft rustle of grass, and then nothing. "Well then, shall we get going?" "Sheba does not like to be kept waiting," Malak said, giving himself a quick shake of his giant frame. "Where is the town of Lokite?" Elias said, standing cautiously to make sure his legs would hold. "It's actually not far, near the end of the forest. If I remember correctly, the main road should not be far from where we are." Elias nodded in acknowledgement, and the pair began walking in that direction. They found the road with little trouble, and in no time the road had brought them to the edge of the forest. Now that his sight was not unhindered by trees, he could see off into the distance of the town of Lokite. It was still a good ways off, but he could see the people bustling about like ants and smoke belching out from various chimneys that poked out randomly from the rooftops. From a distance, the town was not overly large, but Elias had a feeling that getting lost in such a place was an easy task. As they drew near, he could hear the various noises and merriment associated with the town of Lokite. Merchants were calling out wares and haggling prices with customers, while women gossiped and shouted at men and children alike. Elias was somewhat concerned that the polar bear would cause a panic, but as they entered into the town, no one batted an eye at the pair. He found the reason why. Everywhere he looked, animals of all shapes and sizes were bustling about the city with as much ownership of it as the people in it. He saw one man bargaining with a large python about crop protection, and yet another weird scene in which a herd of goats and 5 men were discussing milk and wool production. "Is anything normal here?" Elias asked the polar bear. "What do you mean?" "Do all animals act like people?" The bear huffed. "I don't know what you're talking about. We have always been this way, and there is nothing strange about it. The only distinction between us is there are those that have been blessed with the gift of intelligence, the animals you see here, and the dumb ones who can neither speak nor reason. But shouldn't you be thinking less about animals and more about finding Yiddick?" "I honestly don't know where to start," he admitted. Malak looked up at the sky, then sighed. "Well, I guess for now we should call it a night. It will be dark soon, and I would much rather stay at an inn than outside." "You can stay in an inn?" Elias asked. The void of emotion was really starting to bug him, or at least it would be if he could be bugged. Again, I don't know why you found this astounding after you just saw the town and its inhabitants, but then again, you are Elias. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, the bear said with a grin on his maw. Now back to the business of the inn. I believe we should be able to find one closer to the center of town. Malak began walking, and didn't wait to hear what else Elias had to say. Elias, after a few minutes of hard thinking, decided it was best just not to think about the strangeness of Salih, and just to accept things as they come. But this was easier said than done, and by the time Malak had found an inn, the bear was quite annoyed with the never-ending stream of questions that came from the boy. I think I liked you better when you couldn't feel a thing, the bear mumbled to himself. I heard that, Malak, Elias said, smiling innocently. The bear huffed, and Elias knew he got one on him, and suddenly he really wished he had the emotion to go with it. There was no one in the main hall, except the man scribbling furiously at a desk near the back of the room. Even as the pair approached him, he did not pause nor look up from his work, but merely grunted a brisk welcome. Good evening, sir. A room, if you please, and I would like to discuss the matters of payment, Malak said as they stopped in front of the desk. The man sighed as if annoyed, and stopped his work and looked at them finally. He was in his prime, with sandy-colored hair and greenish-gray eyes. Wrinkles bulged unhappily from his forehead as he frowned at them, and as he extended a hand to Elias, he could see a deep scar that traced the back of his hand and disappeared into his sleeve. Gin Truman, owner of this inn. Elias shook hands with him and found them to be rough and leathery. What kind of payment were you thinking of? Malak answered, My companion and I have no money, but we are exceptional at hunting and will provide 2 weeks' worth of food in return for 3 days' lodging. Gin eyed the pair incredulously, as if he couldn't believe the bear's statement. He looked down at the desk again and began scribbling furiously, and after a minute or two looked up again. 2.5 weeks' worth of food and you got a deal. Elias could see the hairs of Malak's neck rise as he answered, That is a bit steep. After all, 2 weeks is more than enough of a payment. I thought you guys were hunters. Such hunters that could so easily boast of getting 2 weeks' worth of food for payment could surely find this an easy task, Gin said, eyeing the bear with cunning. You overestimate us, sir, and we made no such boast. But I take it you will not lower your price? Gin Truman smiled, revealing perfectly white teeth, and Malak sighed. Then we have no deal. Wait! Elias looked over to a girl around his age coming out a door next to the desk where Gin sat. Shame on you, Gin. You know as well as I do that is too high a price for 3 nights, the girl scalded, and Elias saw Gin's cheeks go bright red in embarrassment. I was only pulling their leg, Mirren. He turned back to Malak. Give me 1 week's worth of rations and you got a deal. Elias watched the hairs of Malak's neck slowly descend back in place. Deal, Malak said, and he looked at the young lady. Thank you for your help. Mirren smiled, and Elias couldn't help but notice how cute she looked when she did so. Mirren was a little shorter than Elias and had long black hair that seemed to soak up sunlight. Her eyes matched her hair with black eyes that looked bottomless and shone fascinatingly like oil in water. Her skin was pale, and she looked small but was well built, despite the look of fragility. What is your name? Elias suddenly realized that Mirren was talking to him. Elias, he said a bit more quickly than he would like. The action broadened Mirren's smile, and for the first time he was thankful he did not have the emotion, because he was sure he would be blushing. Well then, let's get you settled, Mirren said, as she opened the door she had previously come from. Elias made a move to follow her, but stopped when he noticed Malak was not moving with him. Go get settled. I will be back with the payment we owe, Malak said as he slowly shuffled back toward the door of the inn. Oh, and Elias, the polar bear waited until he had the boy's attention. Do not leave the room until I get back. With that, the white bear turned and left the inn, leaving Elias with Mirren. Well, come on, you heard him. Let's go. She tugged at his arm until Elias stumbled awkwardly after her. She chatted unceasingly, talking about clothes, people he did not know, politics of the town, and how Gin was a good guy but could be rather greedy at times. Elias said nothing but let her chatter on. He found that he was content with just watching her move. She didn't move like a normal person. Rather, she flowed or danced to some unknown music that he was unable to hear. Her movements were always precise, yet graceful, and poised as if she could move no other way. "Why are you staring at me like that?" she asked, her head cocked slightly to the side. He hadn't realized that he had been staring. He looked away quickly. "No reason." A slow smile spread across her face, and all at once she laughed. "I like you, Elias. You're a funny person." Elias blinked, unable to comprehend what had been so funny. Finally, Mirren stopped at a door and produced a key from somewhere he didn't see. She unlocked the door and opened it wide, and then handed Elias the key she had used. "This is yours in the bear's room. It's been a while since we had a guest like him come through, so I will have to come back with proper bedding for him." She stepped back and let him into the room. The room was larger than he had expected, but then again, a bear did make the reservations. There was a single bed in the room, neatly made, and a small desk with a chair that was next to it, with a lamp placed in its center. In the far corner there was a sink for washing and a medium-sized pitcher for water. The other corner had old hay and grass spread out all over the floor, and Elias guessed that that's what Mira meant by new bedding. "Will it do?" she asked. Elias turned to look at her. "Yes, this will do." She smiled, apparently pleased. "Good. I will be back shortly to clean up the old bedding and put new bedding down." "Would you like some help?" Elias offered. "Tisk, tisk," she said, wagging a finger at him. "You are a guest. Act like it. Besides, I've been doing this for quite a while now. I think I can handle changing some bedding." Without waiting for a response, she skipped out of the room, barely causing the door to moan as it clicked shut. Elias suddenly let out a huge sigh, and he realized that he had been holding his breath. She was an interesting girl. She was light and cheerful and would talk your ear off if you let her. But something about her made him uneasy. He was indeed fascinated with her, and he found that he liked her company, so why the uneasiness? He shook his head and dismissed the thought. He had been through so much already, with talking animals and losing his ability to feel emotion and touch, that he simply thought to himself to be overreacting. His thoughts turned toward his first experience in the woods with the creature that had nearly got him. His body began to shake suddenly, and the knot formed, curling tightly in his stomach. What was that thing? The more he thought about it, the more he found he didn't want to know at all. A sudden knock at his door broke him out of his thoughts, and he was thankful for the distraction. He went to the door and opened it to find Gin standing there, looking annoyed again. "Dinner will be served downstairs in the hall. Just let Mirren know when you're hungry." Elias blinked. He wasn't sure, but he was almost positive that Mirren had made him come up and welcome him. "Thanks. I'll wait until Malak gets back, though." Gin rolled his eyes. "Suit yourself." He then quickly turned and walked down the hall, mumbling to himself how he was such a softy when it came to Mirren. Elias shook his head as he had guessed right and returned to the solitude of the room. Since Malak had told him to stay put, he decided he would try to sleep before Mirren or Malak returned. He plopped down on the bed and barely noticed the world around him becoming blurry as he drifted off into sleep. The loud banging on the door woke him up with a start, and he cried out as he fell out of the bed into a heap on the floor. Mirren burst through the door. A large sack was strapped to her back, and small droplets of sweat beaded her forehead. "Are you all right?" she asked as she quickly unstrapped herself from the sack. "I'm fine," Elias said, standing and mentally thinking he was glad he had no emotions to be embarrassed. "Looks like you had a nightmare, judging by the way you look," she smiled. "I'm fine," he repeated blandly, and then quickly changed the subject. "Is that Malak's bedding?" She nodded and then turned and began gathering up the old bedding that littered the floor. Elias had thought and decided it was worth it just to at least mention it. "Hey, Mirren, can I ask you something?" "Sure," she said without pausing, picking up piles of bedding with such speed it was hard to believe. "Do you happen to know a guy named Yiddick?" Mirren dropped everything she had in her arms and stood up straight. She looked at Elias with such intensity that he instinctively took a step back. Her gaze only intensified, and it seemed like she had become just like a predator eyeing her next kill. She strode forward, gaze still locked with Elias, until she stood toe-to-toe with him. Her voice was low, and the caution laced her words as she spoke them. How do you know Gen's brother? Well, that is chapter 1 of Stranger in a Familiar Place. Thank you guys so much for being with me and putting up with me. As I said, it's like the first time I've ever done that. But if you guys are interested in the book, again, you can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, as well as iTunes, in ebook and paperback form. If you type in my name, Berica Smith, or Stranger in a Familiar Place, it should pop up pretty well. So yeah, that was that. Thank you for, not slaying me whenever I mess up. Again, you'd think these are my words. I should know what I'm saying, right? Real quickly, the 5 questions that were asked of me, just to get a little bit, more information about me. First question is, have I traveled to another country? Yes, I actually have. I lived in Iceland for about 5.5 years with my family. My dad was military at the time, or working for the military, Air Force. And so I lived there, and I would totally go back. One thing I miss about Iceland is the food. Like, just think of any good French fry place that you know of, or some place here that's famous for their French fries. Icelandic fries beat it, hands down. I've never had fries like that, ever. They're so delicious. So, yes, love it. The second question that was given to me was, what are my favorite books or series to read? And I have to say, I am a sucker for the C.S. Lewis series. My favorite out of that series of the Chronicles of Narnia would be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I absolutely adore that book. My second favorite series would be the Wayfarer Redemption series by Sarah Douglas. If you guys haven't read the Wayfarer Redemption series by Sarah Douglas, that woman is phenomenal. I loved it. Go read her books. There's plenty of them. I love them. Anyways, they're great. So that was question number 2. Question number 3. Do I own any pets? Yes, I actually own a dog and 2 cats, 2 long hair and a Chihuahua mix. The Chihuahua mix is named Chibi. I have a cream and white long haired male cat that is named Cider. And then I have one that I rescued as a kitten, and I pulled her from Toyota Camry, and so that's how she got her name, Camry, or Cam as we like to call her. And then I like to call my long hair Usagi. So that's question number 3. Question number 4 would be, what are some of my hobbies outside of reading? I'm a big anime fan. I actually, collect statues and I game as well. I get a lot of figures and games year round. I have a lot of different systems. I think I have like 4 or 5 different systems that I currently own right now. So that's what I do outside of reading. And 5, what was my inspiration for Stranger in a Familiar Place? Stranger in a Familiar Place came out of me having an out-of-body experience when I was a child, and kind of an answer to a question of what would happen if that really were like a life or death situation. We talk about people who die on the table, and then they come back, and then they said they saw this person, or they went these places, or they went to heaven or hell, or whatever the case may be. So I kind of play around with that idea of it. It was really fun to write, really, really inspiring. I'm actually right now working on a indirect sequel to Stranger in a Familiar Place. So be on the lookout for that. You can actually find out more details about that, or just check on the progress of that one on my Twitter page. I usually like to update that one more than anything else. And those were the 5 questions I received. So I thank you guys so much. Now it's time for the big finale and the big win. Big reveal win. The reveal win big, whatever. The 2 winners for my giveaway for Stranger in a Familiar Place. Before I say them, you guys have been phenomenal with this giveaway. We had over 100 participants in this giveaway, so I was amazingly floored by it. Thank you all for that so much. But the winners are Adam Gaffin, and I'm so sorry, Emmanuel, if I say your last name wrong, but Emmanuel Carrasquero. Carrasquero. I hope I said his name wrong. If I did, I'm so sorry. I got you though. I got you. Um, you guys are the winners. I will be contacting you over the weekend. You guys will have 3 days to respond to me, and if I have not heard from them within those 3 days, then I will move on to the next participant until we get our winner. Again, the winners have won a signed copy of the book from me, as well as a $10 Amazon gift card and keychain of A Stranger in Familiar Place. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you guys were encouraged to go out and buy the book for yourself. If you've already received the book from me, I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for believing in me and going all in on it. Be sure to leave those reviews, as it helps me and the book get discovered. But thank you guys so much for joining me. Love you guys. Have a great day.